morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Mary Ann, for that introduction and for your leadership here at ALEC. It is so great to be able to work both through public and private sector on an issue that we absolutely hold dear. I'm so excited to be bringing up our panel in just a couple of minutes, but I'm hoping you'll just allow me a moderator's privilege to wake you up and to make sure that you're fully engaged in this discussion about the role of civics in education and in our society. If I could see the first slide, please. So I want you to look at this slide. 23% of students perform at or above proficient in civics assessments in the United States. That should be a chilling thing to you all right now. And 23% of 8th graders performing at or above civics in a nation and a time when we need everybody engaged is absolutely ridiculous. Next slide. This tells you a little bit more granularly, and you can pull this off the National Assessment of Educational Progress, but below basic, proficient, advanced by race over the years, essentially fewer than half of our kids and fewer than 20% of our minority kids actually perform at any level that's acceptable to be in the greatest land in the country. So to get us started to figure out why, I would love to introduce to you 3 people whose entire careers have been based around helping children, helping students absolutely succeed and to change this. And I'm delighted that they actually believe and that civics is one of the key elements to making that happen. Jillian Balow was elected to a second term as Wyoming's 22nd State Superintendent of Public Instruction 2018. Was president right now of the board of the directors of the Council of Chief State School Officers, which means she gets to lead other state superintendents around the country. She has held a number of state leadership positions. I don't believe in long introductions, by the way, because we have so much to talk about. She's a co-chair, though, of the Women's Antelope Hunt in Wyoming, which I absolutely love. 5th generation Wyoming native. Jillian, come on up. Thank you. Everyone welcome Jillian. Another rock star woman superintendent of public instruction from Montana, Elsie Arntzen, was elected to a 4-year term in 2016. She's the current state superintendent, a 4th generation Montanan from Billings, has been a career educator, mother, grandmother, and so focused on outcomes. I am absolutely delighted to bring her up. Welcome, Elsie. And last but not least, Molly Mitchell Spearman. Molly was elected to the 18th South Carolina State Superintendent of Public Instruction in 2014. She has had a career spanning time as a music teacher, assistant principal, deputy superintendent, and in the state legislature. Molly, thank you so much for being here. Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
So does that data that I just showed chill you? What do you think?
Well, yes, and number one thing is we're becoming apathetic to it. In other words, it's normal, and it shouldn't be normal. So we need to change the data. We need to change the message around the data.
Okay, so that's a great point, messaging. Molly, when you were running, did this issue come up? Like, is it something that just we in these rooms think about?
No, actually, it was a center point for my campaign, and we have done some things in South Carolina. My colleagues across the nation have joined us, but the big shift for us in South Carolina is that I think we made a huge mistake over the last few decades in that we taught our students to prepare them for college, and we were measured on that one ACT, SAT test score, and we realized that that was wrong, and that yes, we need to do that, but there are many students, there are many other things that we need to do that we do in school, and we need to concentrate and also measure those things. So for us, as well as many states, we've changed now, and we call it the profile of the South Carolina graduate, and we look at 3 areas. It's not just content anymore. It's not just math, science, English, language arts, foreign language. Those things are important, but as equally important are building skills and character and preparing students not just for college and career, but also for citizenship. And I'll have to give a shout out to one of our wonderful legislators, Representative Alan Clemens, whom you know. I'm very proud that he's representing us. But our state legislature also adopted this language that our purpose in our schooling, K-12 schooling in South Carolina, is to be sure that when a student graduates with their high school diploma, they not only have the content knowledge, but they have the skills and the character to be successful in college, career, and citizenship. So that has put a focus on civics education that we really needed.
Okay, so let's define this, though, Jillian. Help the audience understand what exactly do we mean when we're talking about civics, because part of this is, and I've been talking to folks here for a couple of days now, assume that we're all getting it. So what is it, and how do we impart it to our kids?
Yeah, that's so important to contemplate before we even begin the discussion about civics education problems and solutions. And I think that generally we can all agree that that civics education is the sort of this common bucket of rights and processes and citizenship and duties, etc. But I think there are two main aspects that we fail to incorporate in every basic decision about civics. And number one is the underpinning of historical documents like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that really ought to serve as the foundation for the values that we impart on our students. And that civics, all civics, duties, processes, citizenship should be taught through that historical lens. The second thing that I really think that we're missing is this concept that it's an education problem, that teachers aren't doing their job. And in part, that's true. But I have a really captive audience today with policymakers from across the nation. And I'm just going to say that if we're not in classrooms and if we're not holding our locally elected school boards accountable for high quality education, and if we're not taking part in being part of the solution, then we're really missing the boat. The most important civics education is taught in school, applied in neighborhoods, communities, etc. And there's a real mismatch in what we consider as a society right now to be civic engagement, which might include looking at social media or posting something that is vitriolic or divisive, when in fact the most important and impactful citizen or civic engagement takes place again in our neighborhood, in our community, and we in here are the very best role models to make that happen and to show our students through our organizations, through our policy making, and through our leadership in our community what that looks like, because it doesn't look like what's happening on social media or in Washington, D.C.
Such a great point. And I think that what you're also alluding to with policymakers is we have to figure out what happened in order to correct it. So what did happen, right? So there's three theories out here, and I want your opinions. We're going a little out of script, ladies. I want your opinions about which of these really apply. So one opinion is, oh my gosh, it was NCLB. NCLB got rid of all the good stuff. Oh my gosh, NCLB, the federal government stinks. That's what happened to civics. Number two, teachers are not prepared to teach history, civics, social studies, etc. So therefore, it doesn't get done because you don't teach what you're not comfortable doing. Number three is most people are apathetic. They don't understand government anyway. So even if you had NCLB and teachers didn't know, it wouldn't matter. Any of those apply?
I think all three. I'm sure my colleagues here will want to comment too, but I think a part of it is our teachers are not prepared to teach and reach students. It's more than just learning facts. We're okay at lecturing and teaching the facts, but civics education has to be actionable. And so I think in good schools and in classrooms where instruction is being done properly today, and this is bubbling up from teachers saying this, not top down, it's better, it's bubbling up. But we see this in our state where this need to facilitate learning, to let students take control, let them find their interest, let them do projects, let them learn the old 4-H motto. I was involved in 4-H. I don't know if any of you were, but learn by doing. It's not just sitting in the classroom and regurgitating the facts that you've learned, but really to get active. So when I go to schools now, in schools that are really doing a good job in instruction, you walk in and the students are involved with their learning. They're taking control of their learning. They are doing projects. And we're measuring them, and this is the hard part because we have to be accountable to be sure that there are measurements there. It's harder to do a good job with measuring action. It's easy to regurgitate facts and measure that, but are they really getting it? Are they competent? Do they know how to take what they've learned and put it into action to identify a problem and solve it, to then solve a problem in their community? So I think we have to do a better job of helping our teachers become facilitators of learning and move our systems of education from being just all assessment-based, giving a test that you bubble in the answer, to how do we measure when students really have got it, when they know how to take the content and put it into action. And that's what civics education is really about. It's different than history.
But it sounds like you're also saying the answer to civics education is fixing the problem of education writ large.
Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. It's not just about math and reading. You know, civics education, being a citizen, is the glue for school. I mean, it's social studies, right? I mean, it has things to do with putting a group of individuals together, whether they're adults or whether they're young learners, putting them together in a society where they can all get along. But it is the foundational documents. Jillian, you're exactly spot on, making sure that we have a foundation first. And then we can go forward. But there's a lot of things that personalized learning that you had spoken about, that's exceedingly important. Putting it on to the student. The student is the bus driver, basically. And the teacher, when we talk about our teacher prep programs, making sure that civics education, economics, geography, all of those things are taught to our teachers so they are comfortable, as you had mentioned.
And you mentioned the three theories, and I agree, and would also add that we have a problem now because this has been ongoing of two generations, a generation of students who had weak civics instruction as youngsters who are now in schools teaching and don't have the skills or the underpinnings or the foundation to teach effectively. And so I think what we're seeing happen in society and also in our classrooms is social justice being mistaken for civics education, which just is the tip of the iceberg, right? And kind of glossing over the values that we share as a nation and substituting those for the reactions that we have or the feelings that we have about things happening from day to day to day. And really transposing beliefs for reactions. And that is very dangerous. But again, I think that's multi-generational. Number one, our teachers, our younger teachers especially, had, and I'm reiterating this, had a lack of civics education, and now they're teaching civics education or lack thereof.
You know, it reminds me of a good friend of Alec, a good friend of mine, one of my mentors, Bill Bennett, Education Secretary Bill Bennett, used to say what was critical is the 3 C's, character, content, and choice. And he would say about content, don't apologize for saying I'm going to require you to learn these amazing foundational documents, the amazing foundations of our country. We think and we substitute our judgment, what we know is best, for, locally, we are going to trust teachers. Yes, you can. But when you trust teachers, what ends up happening is they actually want to start schools that teach these things. You know, I'm still struck by the majority of charter schools that started after initial laws got started were things like the Benjamin Franklin Classical Academy. Right, great hearts. There are schools out there, K-12 started their schools around core knowledge. So people that go and have the freedom and innovation we were talking about last night, do the right thing. So is there a link, or is that just my hopeful, Jeannie Love's choice idea? That is there a link between getting great education in front of our kids and making sure we have freedom, flexibility, opportunity, innovation?
Yeah, I think I'm going to bookend that with a lesson learned as State Superintendent of Wyoming for 5 years now, and that is to say that I worked with, and a shout out to our legislators from Wyoming who are here in the room, as well as my Chief of Staff who listened to me complain for 2 sessions about working to get legislation passed that would require all high school graduates to pass the citizenship test, which I think is important, but it's not the end-all be-all, right? It doesn't ensure that kids are learning what they need to learn. It ensures that they're passing a test. That is fruit that's like beyond ripe, right? That is easy to pick apart, from the standpoint of not one more test, and this has nothing to do with our curriculum. Is it even aligned, and so on and so forth. So 3 failures with that bill, but again, shout out to the legislators in the room because I know where they are on this. And 3 failures on that bill to require the citizenship test. And then I really started reflecting and thinking about, you know what, this really does need buy-in from the community level, from teachers, from state policymakers, because we all agree that it's important. We all agree that they should know that, but yet there's this disconnect between students knowing and students taking a test on it. So I think it has to, again, be yes and. Yes, we require it, and this is how we require it, but also this is how it's important. This is what's important in, these are the important milestones in getting students to that point.
So when it comes to freedom, freedom in Montana, we uphold all of our rights, especially the Second Amendment, and it's exceedingly important that there's freedom in schools. And it needs to be put on the student. The student has the freedom, and the parent is the one that is in charge. So making sure that we have that parent in control when it comes to civics education. Jillian, you also talked about that it's a community, and it is a community that works within our schools, and we need to make sure that they understand what report cards mean, they understand everything, but they help build it. It's not something that school does to the community. Civics education is the same thing. In Montana, we haven't redone our civics education since 2000. So I'm right now got in a huge group of community members together discussing what is civics education for Montana. And not one original document was discussed. So we had to come back to the table and say, what is a document? What does original mean? And peel it all the way back to that. But there is a beginning, and I think that's the bright spot that you see of leaders that are here today and here in the audience. We have to start. And no matter where we are, we have to go forward, and we have to put our students number 1 first, because they are going to be in your chairs. They're going to be in our chairs here, and we need to make sure that America is strong all the way through, from pre-K all the way through graduation.
So, Molly, help us figure out how to do this. I think that in South Carolina, especially being one of the original colonies, as we go and look at the 250th, they just announced a congressional commission. The quincentennial will be 250 years old in 2026. You've spent time as a legislator, a lawmaker, you've been in administrator positions in the classroom, now you're state superintendent. They say that you don't, what's not measured is not met. So how do you make sure they're meeting stuff if we're not measuring it, right? So there is this big elephant in the room, which is we tried to measure things. There's some really good data that we got out of it, which told us our kids weren't doing very well. The problem was school districts didn't know how to respond, so they over-tested as opposed to using a mandate from the federal government to maybe be challenged. So help us, how do we measure it if we're not testing?
Well, and you brought a real tough topic, because this is a balance. We hear it, and I campaigned on this, and we've done everything we possibly can to reel back in the assessments, because I believe we are testing too much. And sometimes those assessments were not giving good information to teachers. They're at the end of the year. Before you even get the results, the students have moved on to another grade level. So for us right now, we are looking we've gotten rid of some tests that we felt that are not required at the federal level, and we felt that we could do without. But at the same time, we are working right now on, as I mentioned earlier, our personalized learning, our competencies that we have established. And those competencies are things like, I can communicate my ideas and expressions both orally and written. I know how to be involved and to take an idea and petition my community or get involved, be engaged in my community. Those competencies can be found at any level, whether it's in kindergarten or it's in 12th grade. So we're trying now, how do you figure that out? How do you measure it? And we're bringing stakeholders together, but a lot of it is for the students to show what they're doing, being able to present a project, being able to, at the end of 8th grade, get up in front of a group and express to the audience what they've learned and how they've learned it. Very different type of assessment than what we've been used to, and it's much more difficult to do. But that's the work that we are on right now in South Carolina, because again, civics should be actionable. It's hard to measure action with a bubbling test. So I would caution us as we move forward that we've really got to think about, how do we know our kids are competent and that they are going to have the skills, the character that they need, and the content to be good citizens. It's not just bubbling test. And we need to get away from that, and we need to come up with more measures like portfolios, presentations, where we're measuring and seeing how well our students perform, performance-based assessments.
And Elsie, I'm wondering, building on what Molly's suggesting, which is such a great point, and I think what you're also saying, Molly, is just passing a bill is not going to get civics done, but we want to come back to maybe policy in a minute. But we were talking at breakfast about money and how money flows and districts. And so let's hit the sacred cow of districts and school boards, because a lot of us here think that school boards and districts, that's local control, and as long as you leave it to them, everything great's going to happen. But they're not really, I'm glad I'm hearing some rumbling, they're not really all that anymore, right? And so what really is that Lexus of power, and how, like, if money's involved, can we stimulate this at a different level?
Thank you. You know, you bring up the political animal, and it's here right now. School boards are elected, and in Montana and all of our states, you know, it's local control, and it's an easy thing as a state constitutional officer to say, that's their problem. But it's not. It's a collaborative discussion, and who gets elected, whether it's compensation or not, it doesn't matter. But the most important thing is, what matters is the focus. The focus isn't on a system. The focus should be on the child. Wherever that child is, whoever that child is, wherever they come from. And I think that's the problem that we have. You have change makers here. I know I was elected the same as the president. I'm a disruptor. My job, after 30 years of having one party hold this position, was to disrupt, to make sure that the focus does go back to the original, which is the child. And if we can have our school boards understand that it's not just brick and mortar, that it's the children inside that school box that matter. That's the focus.
So why do we have school districts?
You're looking at me, Jeannie. That's definitely off script.
I was going to say, was that in the question box?
Yeah.
No.
You know, I think the power that our locally elected school boards have is often gone to waste. These folks that are on locally elected school boards oftentimes don't get paid. They do an enormous amount of work. They have calls at every hour of the day. And I think honing that work, recognizing the value and the responsibility that our locally elected boards have, but sometimes do not exercise, is key. And that could be why we should have school districts, having local control. But oftentimes school boards are focused on the initiatives of the superintendent that they hired, or on perhaps budget. Both of those are very important. But understanding that choosing curriculum, that dictating how much time during the day is spent on different subjects, including civics education, on helping coordinate those efforts and rally around those efforts and build momentum is key. And that simply can't be done from the state or the national level. That really needs to be done at the community level. So the power of a locally elected school board may be the answer to your question.
May I comment? I had not really planned, this was not on the question sheet, but I'd like to comment because I have had to take some extreme action in my 5 years in South Carolina, and I agree totally that the best way to operate education is at the local level and with our elected school boards. But at the same time, if those school boards continue for a long time to get off focus from what is best for the child, and actually I have had to declare an emergency in we have 79 districts now in South Carolina, and I have had to declare an emergency in 3 of those districts because, quite honestly, some of the school board members, a majority, had gotten off focus. And there were things going on, corruption. The children were not at the focus of what's best. And we had worked with them for a number of years, and the change was just not there. So it's very unfortunate, and I never do this very quickly. It's with a lot of thought. But as state leaders, we have to do what is best for students. And if it means when the adults are not doing the right thing, then we have to step in. And so thankfully, our state legislature has given the state superintendent in South Carolina that authority, and I have had to use it. The authority of the local board members has been removed, and I am managing those districts. It's a lot of extra work, but a tremendous improvement. And the opportunities and the achievement level of the students in those districts, and that's really what it's all about, has grown fantastically in the year and a half, 2 to 3 years that we've been in those districts. So while I totally agree, there does come a time when the state, our responsibility is to be sure that every child in our state is receiving a free and strong public education that's going to prepare them to be good citizens, then we've got to step in.
And what I love about the way you both answer that, and Elsie, I want you to jump in, is the fact that, A, I didn't tell you I was going to ask that, but B, but you talking about states still have to look at these districts and school boards and decide, are they doing the job? And I think all too often we need to critique ourselves because sometimes we think, and we run for office, and legislators are out there, and you all think that it's being handled. Because school boards are to many Republicans or people on the right what unions are to the left. That's where you go for control. That's where you rely on them. And yet that's not always even. And so if we can get them to realize their power and adopt and push, but it takes you, your legislators in the state, parents from the bottom up, because isn't that the answer? That there's no one place that you can expect our kids to learn history.
So I'm going to ask all of you out here, how many of you have attended a school board meeting? Raise your hand, please. Excellent. I need more of you to raise your hands, because if you can be there and then you empower them to be who they are. At the state level here in Montana, we help them in their budgeting process. We help them understand the laws and regulations after a session or the current ones that are on the books. We make sure that we're there to serve. And I think that's the collaborative partnership that has to be so that we can empower them to do the right thing, which is support our children.
And so let's go to one of the other challenges in making sure our kids are all learning. So district leaders, right? So a lot of district leaders will blame the school board. It's not happening. School boards will blame the district leaders. The district leaders will blame the legislators. What can people here do to make sure district leaders are also holding their own people accountable for these areas? If we don't want mandates, but we maybe need some policies. What's the right balance to make sure our kids are actually learning what it is they go to school to learn? Because when you look at proficiency, one of the things, I know it sounds obvious, but if fewer than 50% of kids are, by the way, proficient in any subject, reading, writing, math, geography, you name it, it's usually around 30%. It's probably 15 for most minorities. We're not educating. That means the money we're spending to go to school is not being spent well. It's not all parents. Schools can make up the difference between a failing family, if you will, environment and a kid. So how do we get district superintendents to do the right thing as well?
Well, we're also talking school safety. And in Montana, we're known for our beautiful scenery. We're known for hunting. We're known for our Second Amendment, like I'd mentioned before. But we're also the highest suicide rate in the nation. And they're looking at schools to fix the problem. And they're looking at, me to say, well, we're going to empower teachers and school boards and union to take care of that. It's not that. It's all of us that have to work toward that. So something's happening, and we need to make sure that we're part of the solution, not part of the problem. And it's not going to happen overnight. But if you have leaders, and you in this room here, and when you go back to your colleagues in your state house, and in your communities there, you empower that voice to say, we have to do something different. The system of education in the United States is broken. It's not focused on children. It's not focused on the right measure of success. A test doesn't do it. So I'm empowering you. You have to empower us and school boards to be able to lead that charge. We have to uncover it, look at it, and then seek solutions.
I think, too, as legislators, I was one of you at a time in the 90s, so I understand the challenges that you have. And we often think up programs. Oh, this is a good way to fix it. Let's fix it with this program, this program, this program. And then you get a budget is so categorized that it really ties the hands of the local leaders. So we've really worked in our state to give flexibility. If we want to hold the superintendents and those school boards accountable, then we need to give them the flexibility to use the money to make the decisions that they need to do, to give those choices that are needed at the local level. But then we hold them accountable. And we look at the results. We look at the outcomes. We measure the outcomes. It has to be a broad range, though. Again, we've been too heavily impacted and judging by just one or two test scores. And I think, again, it goes back to these multiple measures. How many students are graduating that pass the citizenship test? How many students are enrolling in ROTC? How many students have industry credentials? Yes, you can use the ACT, SAT as one of the measures, but we have to have multiple measures because school is about more than just one thing. And another challenge for us now is it's easier to do that on the high school level, but then how do you measure the success of your elementary and middle schools? And getting beyond just one or two assessments, measuring their leadership development programs that they have in their schools.
And is there a danger that the important and critical discussion going on today, in fact, progress being made to try to make sure our kids are also workforce ready, right? Workforce prepared in lots of different ways. Is there a danger we're leaving history behind because we're going to make this assumption that, career and technical education or school, or real school, right? We believe that school is actually preparation for life, but is history getting lost in social studies on the way to make sure that we have the right boat builder out there?
Yeah, I think that history and civics education is lost not because of that, but it's just lost in general. During No Child Left Behind, we focused on core subjects that did not include social studies and civics education, and that was a real problem for several decades. But today, I think to those in this room especially, we need to understand that the Every Student Succeeds Act is something that gives the states authority over education. Yet most of us, with the exception of state superintendents who maybe really understand ESSA and what the impacts and what the potentials are in our states, we still kind of look at the federal law and say, what is it that we have to do? And we should be approaching ESSA exactly opposite from a legislative or from a state policymaker, a legislator point of view. And that is, we now have the responsibility. How do we make sure that we take that responsibility seriously and impart it all the way down to the classroom and the student and the family level? And that's not always a thumb or a stick, but it's really recognizing that we have this tremendous responsibility. And Jeanne, you and I had a conversation last night, and I'm just going to reiterate, the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA as we call it, was passed under the Obama administration. And within a week, there were FAQs and non-regulatory guidance and rules and regulations put into place. When Betsy DeVos came in, she peeled all of that back. And it has been, it's kind of left a lot of us scratching our heads because we're not used to that from the federal level. But what we should be doing is opening our arms at the state level and saying, we have this responsibility, and it is a tremendous opportunity. And what we're hearing from organizations that don't necessarily ascribe to that is just opposite, right? We don't have to do that anymore, and that's not it. So it's up to state policymakers to work collaboratively with the state superintendents, the stakeholders involved, to determine what is important, what is our basket of goods, and how are we going to ensure that that is delivered to every student.
And you were given this tremendous opportunity. I'm reminded of former Virginia Governor George Allen, who at ALEC many moons ago stood on a lawn at a big dinner and said, I am so proud to be leading the drive to the standards of learning, because it's the state that should be setting the standards and implementing it. And they made sure that there were history and civics and geography and all those things assessed. It wasn't a high stakes test, meaning you fail and you're out. But it was a measurement. People fought and they screamed and they yelled, and eventually, and people still don't love it, but they realized that actually the level of education and the content in many places that haven't driven it, but he owned the state, right? And then legislators and governors own the state, and then somehow we got away from that. And so you're owning your state role on standards. So is there a role for ALEC and the states to play in creating new model policies that could drive a similar renaissance, if you will, in what we want our kids to know?
Tremendously, and I'm going to come off of what you just had said. So long, education has been regulation, and it's been regulation. If you don't do this, we're not going to give you the money. As state lawmakers right now, and through ALEC, you need to make sure that the student comes first, number one. But you also need to say, we can do anything, because it is in your court right now. It's in all of our states' court. When I talk to this federal administration, they say, Elsie, give me a reason to say yes, because it used to say no. Whenever we would talk to DOE, they would say no right off the bat. But right now, they are wanting yes. ESSA, Every Student Succeed Act, is 4 years old, and we are just now unwrapping this thing. If you go back to your state houses and you look at this law, there's a lot of flexibility that you can help us with. And ALEC can also lead the way. If the focus is on the student, the focus is on the parent and community, it's a win-win situation.
And I think, too, if we as citizens in America look at our education system, what are we really trying to do? We need first really good citizens to keep our republic, our democracy moving forward. We need our young people to be graduated, that they are already registered to vote when they leave. They know the importance of that. They know how to participate in our government. They understand how it works. And that they find their passion in life, whatever type work it is, whether it's being a welder or a neurosurgeon or a music teacher, and that there's success in all of those roles. I think for too long, we made it a lesser success if you work with your hands. And we put too much emphasis, and that the only way to be successful was to graduate a 4-year degree and certainly that's important. But there are many fantastic careers now that are there that a technical college degree will lead you to in that pathway. So we've got to adopt and support as legislators and as people of the United States. We want our young people to be happy. We want them to have happy lives and be successful, contributing citizens, and that really should be our first purpose, I believe, in our education system. And any policy that you can help to support that would be well received, because I think for too long we went down the wrong road and said the only way to be successful is to end up with a 4-year degree in your hand, and not worried enough about the type of person, the character, the skills that we were building through our education system.
Well, and as you know, part of the issue was because we started tracking and decide. We had a lot of people not giving parents the choice or the students, just saying, "Oh, you kind of look dopey. You're going to go over here. You look like you're going to college. You should go over here." And so the challenge for lawmakers, right, is to make sure that when you do technical or career pathways, is really where we should put it. They're still learning history, and people are not making a decision at the wrong level to put someone someplace because they don't know what to do with them, or they're a troublemaker, or whatever it is that so many of our kids and we ourselves were.
Yeah, and I would just respond maybe with a little bit of a personal story. My first job was at a cemetery doing groundskeeping, and I learned to weld. And I've never used that, but to possess that skill and go through the process of learning a skill, it has impacted me. And so my goal is for every student in Wyoming and maybe across the nation to leave high school possessing a skill or a certificate that is of value that they may or they may not use, and also to have students be prepared for military service or college. And so there's 3 plans. There's Plan A, Plan A, Plan A: college, career, military service. And if we approach it, if we approach preparation that way and recognize that civics education and history is an underpinning to create options, not diminish options, I think that's huge.
And you need to start in middle school. I mean, it's really important. Reflect back on when you were in middle school. What kind of civics education was taught then? What was taught to you or what was shared with you of your opportunity when you graduated? So if we can keep student engagement very, very early on, especially in that middle school year, especially in those years where they don't know who they are, but let's share with them who they can be. And college can be part of that. But military, for sure. 1 in 10 Montanans serve or is currently serving. We are very, very patriotic. So I've begun, since we're unwrapping our civics, I've begun Stars and Stripes in every classroom. And it's very much in our middle schools right now. And it's a public-private partnership, this Stars and Stripes in every classroom, to make sure that community is there. So civics education does not just happen in the classroom. It does happen in our communities across our state, and it should happen across our nation.
So final comment adding on to Elsie's Stars and Stripes, which is fantastic. I'd love to know more about that. I'm sure we all would. Other good programs that you know nationally or in your state that people should know about? Because there's a plethora of teaching resources, online tools, programs like the Bill of Rights Institute, the Constitution Center. What should people know about, or do you have a favorite?
Well, one favorite of mine that played a huge impact, and it's not really just done in school, but we do need to realize that there's a lot of learning. We don't just learn to be good citizens while we're at school during the day, but it's Boy State, Girl State program across the country. I participated in that. I think we need to support those programs as much as we can. Stephen Covey has a leadership development program that's in The Leader in Me that is having fantastic results in developing really good character and skills building. Those are 2 programs that I have meant a lot to me.
Jillian, final quick word.
Yeah, you know what? hardly am ever a Debbie Downer, but I'm going to end on a down note and say that I think that there are a lot of really great programs, We the People, iCivics, Girls and Boys States, but the problem is that they're not accessible for every student. So as policymakers, we really, really need to think about, yes, our school district uses We the People, but it may be only the advanced or the AP classes that have access to that, and that's not adequate. And so, yes, there are a lot of great programs out there, but we need, as policymakers and leaders, to make sure that they're accessible for all students.
It's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Jillian, Elsie, Molly, for a great panel. Thank you all.